The chains bit into Aurora's wrists as the guards dragged her through the snow, her swollen belly making every stumble a risk she couldn't afford. 8 months pregnant, exhausted beyond measure, and running on nothing but fear and the desperate need to survive. She had never imagined her life would narrow to this single, terrible moment. Behind her, the fires of her former pack still glowed against the night sky. Not celebration fires, execution fires, and they had been meant for her. "Move faster, traitor!" the guard on her left snarled, yanking her arm hard enough to send pain shooting through her shoulder. The Alpha King doesn't like to be kept waiting. Aurora bit back the cry that rose in her throat. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She had learned that lesson well in the weeks since Beta Marcus had pointed his finger at her across her father's deathbed, his voice dripping with false grief as he accused her of poisoning the Alpha, her own father, the man who had taught her to shift, who had held her when her mother died, who had promised her that their pack would always be her home. Marcus had murdered him with wolfsbane in his evening tea, and then he had looked Aurora in the eye and told the entire pack that she was the killer. They believed him, she thought, the familiar ache of betrayal burning in her chest. They all believed him. The snow soaked through her thin dress, the only clothing she had managed to grab when she fled. Her feet were numb inside her worn boots, and the cold had long since stopped registering as anything but a dull, distant pain. The baby moved inside her, a flutter of life that reminded her why she was still fighting. "For you," she promised silently, one hand pressing against her belly despite the chains. "I will survive this for you." The Shadow Peak border had seemed like salvation when she had crossed it 3 hours ago. Another territory meant another Alpha's jurisdiction, a chance to plead her case to someone who hadn't already condemned her. She hadn't counted on the Border Patrol finding her within minutes, or on the way their eyes had hardened when they saw her chains, still bearing her former pack's crest. "A pregnant traitor," one of them had laughed. "The king will want to see this." Now, as they crested a ridge and the Shadow Peak stronghold came into view, Aurora felt her heart stutter with something between hope and terror. The fortress rose from the mountainside like it had been carved from the stone itself, its towers reaching toward a sky heavy with winter clouds. Torches blazed along the walls, and even from this distance, she could see the banners snapping in the wind, black silk marked with a silver wolf's head, the Alpha King's crest. Darius Frostborn. She had heard stories about him, whispered around fires, and traded between packs like currency. The youngest Alpha King in 3 generations, the warrior who had united the northern territories through equal measures of diplomacy and bloodshed. The wolf whose eyes, they said, could strip a lie bare with a single glance. He will see the truth, she told herself, clinging to the hope like a lifeline. He has to see the truth. But even as she thought it, doubt crawled through her veins. Her own pack hadn't seen it. Her father's closest friends, people who had known her since birth, had watched Marcus spin his lies and believed every word. Why would a stranger be any different? The gates of the stronghold groaned open as they approached, and Aurora was pulled into a courtyard filled with activity. Servants rushed past carrying bolts of fabric and arrangements of winter flowers. Guards in ceremonial armor stood at attention along the walls. The air hummed with the particular energy of preparation, of anticipation. "The coronation," one of her guards muttered to the other. "Tomorrow at dawn. Worst possible timing to bring the king a problem." Aurora's stomach dropped. She was being dragged before an Alpha King on the eve of his coronation, accused of murdering her own father, 8 months pregnant and wearing chains. The odds of mercy seemed to shrink with every step. The throne room doors were massive, ancient oak reinforced with iron, carved with scenes of wolves running beneath a crescent moon. When they swung open, the sound echoed through Aurora's bones. The hall beyond was vast and deliberately imposing, its stone walls hung with tapestries depicting Shadow Peak's history in threads of silver and black. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across a floor of polished obsidian. And at the far end, Raised on a dais of dark stone, sat the throne, sat him. Aurora's guards shoved her forward, and she fell to her knees on the cold floor, the impact sending a jolt of pain through her body. Her chains rattled against the stone, the sound obscenely loud in the sudden silence. "The Border Patrol presents a prisoner, my king," one of the guards announced. "Aurora Blackwood, formerly of the Silver Creek Pack, accused of poisoning her father, Alpha Garrett Blackwood. She was apprehended crossing into your territory, bearing chains of condemnation." Aurora kept her head bowed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The baby kicked, hard, and she pressed a hand to her belly, trying to soothe the restless life inside her. She could feel the weight of dozens of gazes, courtiers and advisors watching the spectacle with varying degrees of curiosity and contempt. "Look up," a voice whispered in the back of her mind. Not her own voice. Something deeper, wilder, her wolf, pressing against her consciousness with an urgency that made no sense. "Look at him." Aurora raised her head, and the world stopped. He was already on his feet, having risen from the obsidian throne with a sudden, violent grace that had frozen everyone else in the hall mid-motion. Darius Frostborn was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and lean with the coiled power of a predator. His black hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and barely contained intensity, a face that might have been carved from the same stone as his throne. But it was his eyes that captured her, held her, claimed her. Dark as winter midnight one moment, and then gold bled through his irises like sunrise burning away shadow, spreading until his gaze blazed with something ancient and undeniable. Heat flooded Aurora's chest. It started as a spark beneath her breastbone and exploded outward, racing through her veins like wildfire, setting every nerve ending alight. Her wolf surged against her skin, not fighting to escape, but reaching, recognizing, responding to something that defied every rational thought in Aurora's head. Mate. The word resonated through her with the force of a physical blow. Her wolf pressed forward so hard that Aurora gasped, her vision swimming between human sight and the sharper, more primal awareness of her other half. Every instinct she possessed was screaming the same impossible truth. Mate. 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 Across the hall, Darius's hands gripped the throne's armrests with sudden crushing force. Wood splintered beneath his fingers, the crack echoing through the silent room. A low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that made Aurora's skin prickle with awareness, her breath catch, her whole body lean toward him despite the chains holding her down. His sharp inhale was audible in the frozen quiet. "Everyone out." The words were barely more than a snarl, and the courtiers scattered like leaves before a storm. Guards, advisors, servants, they fled the throne room in a chaos of whispered confusion and hastily averted eyes. The massive doors slammed shut behind them, and Aurora was alone with the Alpha King, alone with her mate. "It defies everything I know," she thought wildly, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "He's the Alpha King. I'm accused of murder. I'm carrying another wolf's child. This makes no sense." But her wolf didn't care about sense. Her wolf only cared about the pull, the inexorable, devastating pull toward the male standing before her. Even now, exhausted and terrified and heavy with pregnancy, Aurora could feel herself straining against her chains, not to escape, to get closer. Darius descended from the dais with slow, deliberate steps, and each one sent a new wave of heat washing through Aurora's body. His scent reached her as he approached, pine and winter wind and something darker beneath, something that made her wolf whine with recognition. She should have been afraid. A powerful alpha was stalking toward her while she knelt in chains, helpless and accused. She wasn't afraid. For the first time since Marcus had spoken his lies over her father's cooling body, Aurora felt something other than terror. She felt found. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The gold had faded slightly, but it still burned at the edges of his irises, a visible sign of his wolf's presence. Your name, he said, and his voice was rough, raw with something she couldn't name. Tell me your name. Aurora. It came out as barely a whisper. Aurora Blackwood. The muscle in his jaw flexed. His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, and something complicated passed across his features. Pain, maybe, or resignation. When he looked back at her face, his eyes had softened infinitesimally. You're carrying another's child? It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. The father was dead, killed in a border skirmish 2 months ago, before she had even known she was pregnant. She had mourned him, though she had never loved him. Their union had been political, arranged by her father to strengthen alliances. The child she carried was all she had left of a life that had crumbled to ash. Darius was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he crouched until they were at eye level, and Aurora's breath caught at the proximity. This close, she could see the faint scars that crossed his cheekbone, the silver threading through his black hair at the temples. This close, his scent wrapped around her like a promise. The bond doesn't care, he said quietly, and she heard her own wonder reflected in his voice. You feel it. You know what this means. Aurora swallowed hard. I know what it means for me to feel it. I don't know what it means for us. I'm in chains, accused of crimes I didn't commit. I'm pregnant with another wolf's child. You're being crowned king tomorrow. Her voice cracked. This shouldn't be possible. And yet, his gaze held hers, steady and certain and somehow gentle despite the power radiating from every line of his body. Here we are. The baby kicked again, and Aurora flinched. Darius's eyes dropped to her belly, and before she could speak, he had pulled a key from his pocket and reached for her chains. His fingers brushed her wrists as he unlocked the shackles, and warmth flooded through her at the contact. Not just physical heat, but something deeper. Something that felt like the first taste of sunlight after months of winter darkness. You should rest, he said, rising and offering her his hand. Tomorrow, you will tell me everything that happened in your pack. Tonight, you are under my protection. His jaw tightened. No one will harm you here, not while I breathe. Aurora took his hand, and when his fingers closed around hers, she felt her wolf settle for the first time in weeks. Finally, impossibly, at peace. The warmth of his hand around hers sent ripples of sensation through Aurora's body, each wave more disorienting than the last. She had taken his hand, a simple gesture, an acceptance of help, but the moment their skin connected, the bond between them flared with renewed intensity. Her wolf pressed forward again, not with the desperate urgency of before, but with something softer. Recognition. Belonging. The animal part of her had already accepted what her human mind was still struggling to comprehend. Can you walk? Darius asked, his voice low enough that it felt like a secret shared between them. Aurora nodded, though her legs trembled as she rose. The chains had left raw marks on her wrists, and 8 months of pregnancy had made her center of gravity unreliable at the best of times. This was not the best of times. She swayed, and Darius's free hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow with careful strength. The contact sent another pulse of warmth through her veins, and she watched gold flicker through his dark eyes again, there and gone, like lightning behind clouds. Slowly, he murmured. There's no rush. But there was. Aurora could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, the accusations waiting to be answered, the coronation tomorrow, the impossible reality of standing beside her mate while carrying another wolf's child. Her mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. Darius guided her toward a side door she hadn't noticed before, hidden in the shadows behind a tapestry depicting wolves hunting beneath a winter moon. His hand remained on her elbow, and she found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, the brush of his sleeve against her arm, the heat radiating from his body, the way his scent wrapped around her more completely with each step. My chambers are this way, he said, and something in Aurora's chest tightened. You'll stay there tonight. There's a private room. He paused, seeming to read the tension in her body. You'll have your own space, your own bed. I won't. His jaw clenched and she watched him struggle with words that didn't come easily. I won't touch you without your permission, Aurora. Bond or no bond. The sincerity in his voice made her throat ache. She had spent weeks being accused, condemned, hunted. No one had asked her permission for anything. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Darius glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. Why won't I touch you? Why any of this? She gestured vaguely with her free hand, encompassing the hidden corridor, his protection, the fact that he wasn't simply throwing her in a dungeon to deal with after his coronation. I'm an accused murderer, pregnant with another wolf's child. I should be nothing to you but a problem to solve. He was quiet for several steps, leading her up a narrow staircase lit by torches that flickered in unseen drafts. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. The bond doesn't lie, Aurora. Whatever you've been accused of, whoever fathered your child, you're my mate. My wolf recognized you the moment you raised your eyes to mine. He stopped at a landing, turning to face her fully. In the torchlight, the sharp angles of his face were thrown into dramatic relief, but his expression was unexpectedly open, vulnerable even. I've waited 32 years for this. I had begun to believe I would wait forever. Now you're here, and you're in pain, and you're afraid. His hand tightened on her elbow, not painfully, but with an intensity that matched his words. I cannot fix everything tonight, but I can give you safety. I can give you rest. The rest? The accusations, the truth. What happens between us? That can wait until morning. Aurora stared at him, her heart pounding. No one had offered her safety since her father's death. No one had looked at her and seen something worth protecting, rather than something to be feared. The baby, she said quietly. It doesn't bother you? Something shifted in his expression, a shadow of pain quickly suppressed. Bother me? He shook his head slowly. The father was your mate? No. The word came out harder than she intended. An arranged match. Political. He died 2 months ago in a border skirmish. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. I never loved him. But the baby is innocent of all of it. Darius's gaze dropped to her swollen belly, and she watched him process her words. When he looked up again, the gold had crept back into his irises, not with the fierce burn of mate recognition, but something warmer. Any child of yours, he said carefully, will be protected in my territory, as you are protected. The circumstances of conception do not change that. Aurora felt something crack in her chest, a wall she hadn't known she'd built, constructed brick by brick over weeks of terror and isolation. It didn't crumble completely. But for the first time, light seeped through the gaps. They climbed the rest of the stairs in silence, emerging into a corridor that was clearly part of the royal wing. The stone here was smoother, the tapestries richer, the torches giving way to iron lanterns filled with steady flames. Guards stood at intervals, and Aurora tensed as their eyes followed her, but each one merely nodded to Darius and looked away. Here. He stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with the same wolf's head she had seen on the banners outside. These are my chambers. He pushed the door open and led her inside, and Aurora's breath caught. The room was larger than her entire family home in Silver Creek had been, dominated by a massive fireplace where flames crackled with welcoming warmth. Furs covered the stone floor, thick and soft beneath her worn boots. A table near the fire held platters of bread, cheese, and winter fruits, and the scent made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Darius noticed her gaze and released her elbow, gesturing toward the food. Eat. As much as you need. But Aurora didn't move toward the table. Instead, she turned, taking in the rest of the room, the massive bed draped in black and silver, the weapons mounted on the walls, the writing desk cluttered with maps and correspondence. And in the far corner, partially hidden by a heavy curtain, another door. "The private room?" she asked. "Yes." Darius crossed to the curtain and pulled it aside, revealing a smaller but equally comfortable space. A bed heaped with furs, a fire already burning low in a smaller hearth, a window that looked out over the snow-covered mountains. This was meant for... He stopped, something flickering across his features. It was designed for a mate, for comfort. "You'll have everything you need." Aurora stepped past him into the smaller room, her wolf settling further with each breath of his lingering scent. The space felt enclosed in the best way, safe, warm, protected. She could lock the door between them. She could be alone if she needed to be, but part of her, the part that her wolf controlled more and more with each passing moment, didn't want to be alone. That part wanted to turn around, close the distance between them, press her face to his chest and breathe him in until the trembling in her limbs finally stopped. She resisted. It was too soon. Too much. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out how to navigate the impossible situation she had stumbled into. "Thank you," she said softly, not turning to face him. "For all of this. I don't understand why you're being so kind, but thank you." She heard him take a breath, heard the quiet rumble in his chest that might have been his wolf pressing forward. "Rest, Aurora. I'll have servants bring you clean clothes and warm water. If you need anything in the night, anything at all, I'll be in the outer chamber." His footsteps retreated, and the curtain fell closed behind him. Aurora stood in the center of the small room, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby stirred restlessly, and tried to convince herself that any of this was real. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food even as it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. Servants came and went with quiet efficiency, a basin of warm water, a soft sleeping shift, thick woolen blankets for the bed. None of them looked at her with contempt or suspicion. Whatever Darius had communicated to his staff, they treated her with the same deference they would show to any honored guest. It made no sense. Nothing made sense. But exhaustion pulled at her with relentless hands, and by the time the fire had burned down to glowing embers, Aurora found herself crawling beneath the furs of the bed, her body giving out despite her mind's desperate desire to stay alert. She dreamed of wolves running through snow, of a hand reaching for hers in darkness, of warmth spreading through her chest like sunshine through frost. She dreamed of home. Morning arrived gray and cold, but the fire in Aurora's room had been stoked while she slept. She hadn't heard anyone enter, which should have alarmed her, but somehow didn't. She lay still for several moments, orienting herself to the unfamiliar surroundings, before the events of the previous night came rushing back. Chains, the throne room, Darius, the bond. She pressed a hand to her chest, half expecting the warmth to have faded overnight. It hadn't. If anything, the awareness of him had intensified, a constant low hum beneath her skin that told her exactly where he was. Just beyond the curtained doorway, moving around the outer chamber. Aurora pushed herself upright, wincing at the aches that had settled into her muscles. Pregnancy made everything harder, and sleeping in a proper bed after days of running hadn't erased weeks of exhaustion. The clothes the servants had brought fit surprisingly well, a simple dress of dark blue wool, warm and practical, with laces that accommodated her swollen belly. Someone had thought carefully about her needs. She suspected she knew who. She was still braiding her hair when a knock came at the outer door, followed by voices too muffled to understand. A moment later, the curtain swept aside and Darius appeared, carrying a tray laden with breakfast. "You're awake," he said, something like relief flickering in his eyes. "I was going to let you sleep longer, but there are things we need to discuss before the coronation." Aurora nodded, accepting the tray when he set it on the small table beside her bed. Warm bread, butter, honey, sliced winter apples, more food than she had seen in weeks. "You brought this yourself," she observed. "Don't you have servants?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I find I don't like the idea of anyone else serving you. My wolf is... He paused, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious. Possessive. More so than I expected. Something fluttered in Aurora's chest. She looked down at her food, suddenly uncertain how to respond. Eat, Darius said, the command gentle but unmistakable. I need you strong when we speak to my council. She looked up sharply. Your council? They'll want to know who you are, what happened in your pack. His jaw tightened. They'll have questions about the accusations against you and about... His gaze dropped to her belly. Everything. The coronation begins at dawn, but before that, there will be a private council meeting where you can tell your story. Fear crept back into Aurora's chest, familiar and cold. And if they don't believe me? Darius crouched before her, bringing their eyes level. His hands hung loose at his sides, carefully not touching her, but his presence wrapped around her like a physical embrace. I will believe you, he said quietly. Whatever you tell me, whatever happened in Silver Creek, my wolf knows you are not a murderer. He knew it the moment we saw you. His dark eyes held hers, steady and certain. You are my mate, Aurora. I don't take that lightly. And I don't abandon what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Coming from any other alpha, it would have. But from him, it felt like shelter. Like safety. Like the first solid ground she had stood on since her father's death. She ate her breakfast while Darius withdrew to the outer chamber, giving her space to compose herself. When she finally emerged, dressed and braided and as ready as she would ever be, she found him standing before the fire with a dark-haired woman in a council robe. This is Aurora Blackwood, Darius said, and there was something in his voice that made the woman's eyes widen. She is under my protection. Any disrespect shown to her will be considered disrespect to me. The woman, a council advisor, Aurora guessed, bowed her head. Of course, my king. But as they left the chambers and entered the corridor, the protection Darius offered was immediately tested. The throne room was already filling with nobles and dignitaries preparing for the coronation. Aurora kept her head high as they walked, acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, and of the way Darius's hand hovered at the small of her back, close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching. They had almost reached the council chamber doors when a woman stepped directly into their path. She was beautiful in the cold, sharp way of mountain peaks, tall and lean, with silver blonde hair swept into an elaborate style and a gown of deep crimson that stood out against the winter colors of the court. Her eyes, a pale gray that bordered on colorless, fixed on Aurora with undisguised contempt. So this is the pregnant traitor everyone is whispering about, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. I must say, I expected something more impressive from the creature who has apparently caught our king's attention. The silence that fell was absolute. Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks, shame and anger warring in her chest. She straightened her spine, preparing to respond, but before she could speak, a sound rolled through the throne room that made her wolf press close to the surface, Darius's growl. It started low, almost subsonic, but it built until it filled the space with the unmistakable threat of an alpha at the edge of his control. When Aurora glanced at him, gold blazed in his eyes, and the restraint he had shown her was nowhere in evidence. Lady Zara Darkhollow, he said, and his voice cracked like a whip. You will apologize. Zara's confidence faltered visibly. My king, I merely... You will apologize, Darius repeated, stepping forward until he loomed over her. Or you will learn exactly how little patience I have for those who insult what is mine. The word hung in the air. Mine. Aurora felt the weight of it settle over her like a mantle, and saw the moment Zara understood its implications. Forgive me, Zara said, the words clearly forced through gritted teeth. I spoke out of turn. You spoke with deliberate cruelty, Darius corrected, to a woman under my protection, on the eve of my coronation, before the assembled nobility of 3 territories. His voice dropped, dangerous and soft. Any future insult to Aurora Blackwood will be considered an insult to the crown. I trust I make myself clear? Zara's pale eyes flickered between Darius and Aurora, calculation and hatred barely concealed behind a mask of compliance. Perfectly clear, my king. She retreated into the crowd with as much dignity as she could salvage, and the whispers that erupted in her wake held an entirely different tone. Aurora stood frozen, her heart racing, her wolf prowling beneath her skin with fierce satisfaction. Darius turned to her, the gold fading from his eyes, but the intensity remaining. Are you all right? You didn't have to do that, Aurora heard herself say. She's obviously important here. You've made an enemy for my sake. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps? Or something warmer? He reached out and took her hand, heedless of the watching nobles, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that felt impossibly intimate. Zara Darkhollow has been positioning herself as my expected mate for years, he said quietly. I've tolerated her ambitions because she posed no real threat. But you are not a political rival to be managed, Aurora. You are my mate. And anyone who seeks to harm you will learn exactly what that means. The ferocity in his words wrapped around her heart and squeezed. Aurora looked up at him. This alpha king who had greeted her accusation with protection instead of condemnation, who had brought her food himself and given her space, who had just publicly defended her honor before his entire court. She didn't understand him yet. She didn't understand any of this. But for the first time since her father's death, she was beginning to believe she might survive long enough to figure it out. The council chamber lay at the end of a long corridor lined with windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Aurora walked beside Darius, acutely aware of his presence, the heat radiating from him despite the cold stone walls, the way the other nobles parted before them like water before a ship's prow. Her hand remained in his, and she found she didn't want to pull away. The council will have questions, Darius said quietly as they walked. About your presence here, about your situation. You don't have to answer anything you're not ready to discuss. They'll want to know about the accusations against me. They'll want many things. That doesn't mean they'll get them. His thumb traced another circle over her knuckles, and warmth bloomed up her arm. I've already sent riders to Silver Creek to investigate. Until I have the truth, speculation is worthless. Aurora's breath caught. You sent investigators? The moment I learned who you were. He glanced down at her, and something flickered in his dark eyes, gold threading through like lightning through storm clouds. You claimed innocence. I intend to prove it. Before she could respond, they reached a set of heavy oak doors carved with the Shadow Peak crest, a wolf's head crowned with mountain peaks. Guards pulled them open, revealing a circular chamber dominated by a massive table of polished black wood. Around it sat perhaps a dozen men and women, all turning to watch their entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. And there, at the far end of the table, sat Zara Darkhollow. Aurora's steps faltered. The crimson-gowned woman had composed herself since the confrontation in the throne room, her pale features arranged in careful neutrality. But her gray eyes tracked Aurora with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My king, said an elderly man with a silver beard rising from his seat. We've been discussing the coronation arrangements. There are matters that require your attention. They can wait, Lord Aldrich. Darius guided Aurora to a chair at his right hand, a position of honor that drew raised eyebrows from several council members. What cannot wait is the formal introduction of Aurora Blackwood, daughter of the late Alpha Garrett Blackwood of Silver Creek. Late Alpha? A heavy-set man with ruddy cheeks leaned forward. We received word that Garrett Blackwood was murdered, poisoned. His small eyes fixed on Aurora. By his own daughter. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Aurora felt the weight of every gaze in the room, felt the familiar cold dread spreading through her chest. She had faced this before. The accusations, the condemnation, the assumption of guilt. But this time, she was not alone. Accusations require evidence, Darius said, his voice cutting through the tension. I've seen none. Have you, Lord Brennan? The ruddy-faced man sputtered. The reports from Silver Creek. Reports from a pack whose beta controls all outgoing communication. Darius settled into his chair with the easy grace of a wolf claiming territory. Reports I have reason to question. What reason? Zara's voice slid into the conversation like a knife between ribs. Forgive me, my king, but you've known this woman for less than a day. Surely you're not allowing personal feelings to cloud your judgment? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Aurora watched gold bleed into Darius's irises, watched his fingers curl around the armrest of his chair with barely leashed control. Lady Zara, he said softly, you were warned once today about the consequences of insulting Aurora Blackwood. Would you like to test my patience further? Zara's smile didn't falter, but something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, and perhaps the first seeds of fear. I meant no insult, my king. I merely suggest caution. The coronation is tomorrow. Your reputation, your reign, could be damaged by association with an accused murderess. My reputation, Darius said, will be whatever I make it. Aurora found her voice at last. If I may speak. Every head turned toward her. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, felt her wolf pressing close to the surface with a low, warning growl. But she had run long enough, hidden long enough. If she was to have any chance at a future, any future at all, she needed to start fighting for it. I did not murder my father. Her voice rang clearer than she expected, steadied by an anger that had been building for weeks. I loved him. He raised me alone after my mother died, taught me everything I know about being a wolf, about honor, about loyalty. When he fell ill, I sat at his bedside for 3 days without sleeping. She met Zara's pale gaze directly. The poison was wolfsbane, slipped into his evening tea. Tea that was brought to him by Beta Marcus, the same man who accused me over my father's deathbed. The same man who now controls Silver Creek and everything in it. A convenient accusation, Zara murmured. The dead alpha can't confirm it. No, but the servants who witnessed Marcus bringing that tea can, the healer who examined my father's body and found the wolfsbane traces can, the guards who were conveniently reassigned that night can. Aurora's hands trembled, but her voice held steady. I fled because I knew Marcus would kill me to keep his secret, not because I was guilty. The council members exchanged glances. Lord Aldrich stroked his silver beard, his eyes thoughtful. Even Lord Brennan seemed to be reconsidering his earlier certainty. Darius watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps, or something fiercer. I've sent investigators to gather exactly that testimony, he told the council. Within a fortnight, we'll have the truth. Until then, Aurora Blackwood is under my protection, and any further questioning of her honor will be considered a challenge to my authority. The meeting continued, turning to matters of trade agreements and border disputes, but Aurora barely heard any of it. Her heart was still racing from her own boldness, from the feel of Darius's approval warming her through the bond she was only beginning to understand. When the council finally adjourned, the nobles filed out with respectful nods to their king and curious glances at Aurora. Zara lingered, her pale eyes fixed on Aurora with an intensity that made her wolf snarl beneath her skin. You speak well for a trader's daughter, Zara said quietly, too low for the departing council to hear. But words are just words. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? All sorts of truths. Before Aurora could respond, Zara swept from the chamber in a whisper of crimson silk, leaving only the faint scent of roses and something darker beneath. She won't stop. Aurora stared at the door Zara had vanished through. Whatever she wants from you, whatever she thinks she's owed, she won't give up. Darius rose and moved to stand beside her, close enough that his warmth seeped through the wool of her dress. Zara has been plotting to become my queen since before I took the throne. She's connected to half the noble houses in the north, and she's never forgiven me for refusing to choose her as my mate. Can she hurt you? Politically? She can try. He turned to face her, and Aurora found herself caught in the gravity of his presence, unable to look away. But politics are the least of my concerns right now. The afternoon light slanted through the high windows, catching the silver threads in his dark hair, illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He was beautiful, Aurora realized, beautiful in the way of dangerous things, of storm clouds and mountain peaks. And he was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. "You were magnificent in there," he said quietly. "You could have stayed silent, let me defend you. Instead, you fought for yourself." "I'm tired of being silent." The words came out fiercer than she intended. "I've spent weeks running, hiding, letting other people determine my fate. My father didn't raise me to be a victim." Something shifted in his expression, a softening perhaps, or a deepening of the intensity that seemed to burn behind his eyes. "No." He raised a warrior. Heat crept up Aurora's cheeks. "I'm hardly." "You survived." He reached out, and his fingers brushed her jaw with impossible gentleness for hands that had clearly dealt death. "You protected yourself and your child through weeks of terror. You stood before my court in chains and refused to beg. You just faced down my entire council with nothing but the truth. That is what a warrior does, Aurora." Her wolf pressed against her skin, drawn to his touch, to the promise of safety in his voice. She wanted to lean into him, to let his arms close around her, to finally stop fighting long enough to breathe. But the child within her kicked sharply, a reminder of everything she stood to lose. "I can't afford to trust you," she whispered. "I want to. But I've trusted before, and you were betrayed." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, leaving fire in its wake. "I know. I'm not asking you to trust me, Aurora. I'm asking you to let me earn it." For a long moment they simply stood there, the Alpha King and the accused murderess, bound by something neither of them had chosen but both of them were beginning to feel. Then Darius stepped back, and the air between them cooled. "You should rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "The coronation tomorrow will be long, and you've been through too much in too short a time. I'll have dinner sent to your chambers." Aurora nodded, not trusting her voice. She let him guide her from the council chamber, let the guards escort her back to the royal wing, let the heavy door close behind her with a sound like finality. But long after she had eaten, long after the fire had burned low and the shadows stretched across her chamber, she lay awake in the massive bed, one hand pressed to her belly where her daughter stirred restlessly. She could still feel him. Through whatever connection bound them, she could sense Darius's presence somewhere in the castle. A steady pulse of warmth and strength that called to something deep within her. Her wolf wanted to go to him, wanted to curl against his chest and let his arms hold her safe. But Zara's words echoed in her mind. The truth has a way of coming out. What truth? What did Zara know, or think she knew, that gave her such confidence? Aurora turned the question over in her mind until exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her down into dreams of running through endless forests, of a dark wolf racing beside her, of a crimson shadow that followed no matter how fast she fled. She woke to the sound of the door opening. Pale morning light filtered through the windows. The coronation. Today was the coronation. But it wasn't a servant who entered her chamber. It was the castle healer. A thin woman with graying hair and nervous hands, carrying a silver tray with a steaming cup. "Tea, my lady," the woman said, not meeting Aurora's eyes. "To settle your stomach before the ceremony. The king ordered it specially prepared." Aurora pushed herself upright, her back aching from the weight of her pregnancy. "Thank you. Please, set it on the table." The healer did so, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged the cup on its saucer. She turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Is something wrong?" Aurora asked. The healer's face was pale, her lips pressed thin. No, nothing, my lady. Just be careful. During the ceremony, These things can be unpredictable. Before Aurora could question her further, the healer fled, the door swinging shut behind her. Aurora stared at the tea, steam curling from its surface in delicate spirals. Be careful. The words settled into her gut with the weight of foreboding. She reached for the cup, then stopped, her hand hovering over the elegant handle. Her father had been poisoned with tea. The thought struck like lightning, freezing her in place. It was paranoid, surely. The king had ordered this tea himself. It was probably nothing more than chamomile and honey, but her wolf was growling, low and urgent, pressing against her skin with warning. Aurora lifted the cup to her nose and inhaled. Beneath the chamomile, beneath the honey, there was something else. Something sharp and bitter, like fresh-cut grass and copper. Something that made every instinct in her body scream danger. She knew that smell. She had smelled it on her father's breath in his final hours, had learned its name from the healer who examined his body. Wolfsbane. The cup shattered against the floor, tea spreading across the stones in a dark stain. Aurora scrambled backward on the bed, her heart hammering, her hands pressing protectively over her belly. Someone was trying to poison her. Someone had bribed or threatened the healer, had slipped death into a morning cup of tea, had intended for her to drink it and what? Die before the coronation? Lose the baby? Aurora's mind raced through the possibilities, through the faces of everyone who might want her dead. Marcus was leagues away in Silver Creek. The council members barely knew her, which left only one person with motive, with opportunity, with access. Zara. The truth has a way of coming out. Aurora's hand shook as she pushed herself from the bed, as she crossed to the door and threw it open. Guards stood on either side, their expressions startled by her sudden appearance. "I need to see the king," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but something in Aurora's face must have convinced them. One of them nodded sharply and set off at a run, while the other moved to block her doorway. Protective now, rather than restrictive. "Stay inside, my lady. We'll bring the king to you." Aurora retreated into her chamber, her bare feet cold against the stone floor where the poisoned tea had spilled. She couldn't stop staring at the dark stain, at the shattered porcelain scattered across the flagstones. If she had taken even one sip. Her daughter kicked hard, and Aurora pressed both hands to her belly, breathing through the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She would not fall apart. Not now. Not when Zara thought she had already won. The door burst open, and Darius swept into the room like a storm-given form. He was dressed for his coronation in black and silver, a ceremonial cloak sweeping behind him, but his eyes, those eyes burned gold as they found her, as they swept over her body searching for injury. Aurora. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands cupping her face with desperate gentleness. The guard said something about poison. "Are you hurt? Did you—" "I didn't drink it." She gripped his wrists, anchoring herself to his solid presence. "I smelled the wolfsbane before I could. The same poison that killed my father." His expression went terrifyingly still. The gold in his eyes didn't fade. It intensified, spreading until no trace of dark remained. When he spoke, his voice was barely human. "Who brought it to you?" "The castle healer." But she was frightened, Darius. She warned me to be careful. Someone forced her to do this. Threatened her. Aurora's jaw tightened. It was Zara. It had to be. She said the truth would come out. She was planning this. She wanted me dead before the coronation. A growl rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her palms where they pressed to his forearms. "I'll have her arrested. Questioned. If she—" "No." The word surprised them both. Aurora drew a shaky breath, but her voice strengthened as she continued. "Not yet. She'll deny everything, and you'll spend your coronation day dealing with political accusations instead of becoming king. She has connections to half the noble houses, you said so yourself. You think I care about politics when someone tried to murder you? I think you need to be king before you can properly protect either of us." Aurora met his blazing gaze steadily. Zara wants chaos. She wants to disrupt everything, to prove I'm nothing but trouble for you. Don't give her that satisfaction. For a long moment, Darius simply stared at her. Then, slowly, the killing rage in his expression softened into something that looked almost like awe. My father was wrong about many things, he said quietly. But he was right that a king is nothing without a queen who can match him. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You should be falling apart right now. I fell apart for weeks. I'm done with falling apart. Aurora's hand found his, her fingers threading through his. The coronation starts in an hour. I'll be there. I'll stand where everyone can see me, and I'll watch you take your throne. And when Zara sees that her poison failed, she'll make another move. Yes, and when she does, I'll be ready. The throne room blazed with morning light, winter sun streaming through the high windows to illuminate hundreds of assembled nobles. Aurora stood at the edge of the dais, positioned where Darius had insisted, close enough to reach, close enough to protect. The dark blue gown she wore had been delivered to her chambers an hour ago, along with a note in Darius's sharp handwriting. So everyone knows exactly whose protection you're under. She could feel Zara's gaze burning into her back from somewhere in the crowd. The woman hadn't been subtle about her fury when she'd seen Aurora take her place of honor, but she'd been smart enough to keep her expression controlled. Waiting. Planning. Let her plan, Aurora thought grimly. I have plans of my own. The ceremony proceeded with ancient ritual, words spoken in the old tongue that made her wolf stir with recognition. Darius knelt before the high priest, his dark head bowed, and when the crown settled onto his brow, a circle of black iron set with moonstones, Aurora felt something shift in the bond between them. He was king now, truly king. And despite everything that stood between them, despite the danger and the uncertainty and the child she carried that wasn't his, she had never wanted anything more than she wanted him in that moment. He rose, turning to face his people, and his eyes found hers immediately. Gold flickered at the edges of his irises. Mine, that gaze seemed to say. Whatever comes next, you are mine. The cheering began, waves of sound crashing through the throne room as nobles and guards and servants alike acknowledged their new king. Darius raised a hand for silence, and it fell instantly, the obedience of wolves to their alpha, instinctive and absolute. My people, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Today marks a new chapter in our kingdom's history, but before we celebrate, there is a matter I must— Pain lanced through Aurora's abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly as a second wave of agony crashed through her. No, this wasn't— It was too early. She still had weeks. Warm liquid rushed down her thighs. Aurora! Darius was moving before she could speak, leaping down from the dais as her knees buckled. He caught her against his chest, lowering her to the ground with desperate care. Someone get the healer, now! But Aurora had seen the healer's terrified face that morning, had smelled the poison the woman had been forced to deliver. Her mind raced even through the pain, connecting pieces she should have seen before. The tea hadn't just been poison, it had been something else too. Something to bring on labor, to time the birth for maximum chaos. Another contraction tore through her and she cried out, her fingers digging into Darius's arm hard enough to bruise. Through the haze of agony, she heard voices shouting, heard the crowd's gasps of shock and horror, heard someone laugh. That laugh. She knew that laugh. Aurora forced her eyes open, forced herself to focus past the pain. Zara stood at the front of the crowd, her pale features arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach her eyes, but her lips curved, just slightly, in unmistakable triumph. The midwife was delayed, someone was saying frantically. She's not in the castle, no one can find her. Then find another healer, Darius roared. Any healer, now. But Aurora understood. There would be no healer coming. Zara had arranged this perfectly, the poison to start the labor. The midwife conveniently absent, the birth happening on the throne room floor before the entire kingdom. She and the baby were meant to die here, publicly, humiliatingly, proving that Darius's mysterious pregnant refugee had brought nothing but chaos. Another contraction hit, and Aurora screamed. But even through the pain, even through the terror, something in her refused to break. No. She had survived Marcus's accusations. She had survived weeks of running, of terror, of knowing that death waited around every corner. She had survived the wolfsbane meant to kill her and her child this very morning. She would not die here. She would not let Zara win. Darius. Aurora grabbed his hand, squeezing with all her strength. Listen to me. The healer. This morning. She didn't just bring poison. There was something else in that tea. Something to bring on labor. His face went white. What? This is Zara's plan, all of it. The poison, the timing, the missing midwife. She wants us to die here. Aurora gritted her teeth through another wave of agony. And I have proof. She fumbled at the pocket of her gown, pulling out the folded papers she had taken from the tea tray that morning. Papers the healer had left behind in her terror. Papers Aurora had barely glanced at before the guards arrived. But she had seen enough. Zara's seal. Instructions written in elegant script. A list of herbs that any healer would recognize. This was with the tea, Aurora gasped, pressing the papers into Darius's hand. Letters from Zara to the healer, telling her exactly what to do, how to make it look like natural labor, how to ensure no help arrived in time. You lying whore! The crowd parted as Zara shoved through, her composure finally cracking. Her gray eyes blazed with fury as she stalked toward the dais, her crimson gown swirling around her ankles. She's fabricating evidence. She's trying to frame me. Your Majesty, surely you can see— Silence! Darius's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. He rose from Aurora's side, the papers clutched in his fist, and his eyes had gone completely gold. No darkness remaining, only the savage light of an alpha wolf facing a threat to his mate. Guards! Seize Lady Darkhollow! You can't be serious! Zara stumbled back as guards moved toward her. I've been loyal to the crown for years. I am meant to be your queen, not some pregnant traitor who wandered out of the wilderness. Aurora pushed herself up on her elbows, fighting through the pain to meet Zara's eyes. You bribed a healer to poison me. You arranged for the midwife to disappear. You wanted my daughter and me to die on this floor while the whole kingdom watched. You were supposed to be nothing. Zara spat, struggling against the guards who now held her arms. A dead traitor's daughter with a bastard in her belly. You don't deserve him. You don't deserve any of this. Enough. Aurora's voice rang out stronger than she would have thought possible. Something was rising in her chest, heat and power and absolute certainty. Her wolf pressed against her skin, and for the first time she didn't fight it. She let it surge forward, let it lend her strength, let it speak through her. I am Aurora Blackwood. My father was murdered by a coward who blamed me for his crimes. I have been hunted, accused, and nearly killed more times than I can count. And I am still here. She met Zara's shocked gaze without flinching. I am the Alpha King's mate, and you just committed treason before 100 witnesses. Silence fell over the throne room, complete, absolute silence. Then Darius spoke, his voice cold as mountain ice. Lady Zara Darkhollow, for attempted murder of the Alpha King's mate and her unborn child, for conspiracy to disrupt the royal succession, for treason against the crown, I sentence you to exile in the wastes. You will be stripped of your titles, your lands, and your name. From this day forward, you are nothing. Zara screamed, a raw, animal sound of fury and disbelief. You can't do this. My family will never accept. My allies will. Your allies watched you confess. Darius gestured at the silent nobles, many of whom were carefully avoiding Zara's desperate gaze. Take her away. The guards dragged Zara toward the doors, her screams echoing through the hall until the heavy oak slammed shut behind her. And then, In the ringing silence that followed, Aurora felt another contraction tear through her body. "Darius," she gasped. "The baby." He was at her side instantly, his hands finding hers. "I know. I'm here. We're going to do this together. There's no healer. Then I'll deliver her myself." He pressed his forehead to hers, and she could feel his fear through the bond, his terror that he would lose them both, that this one bright spot of hope would be torn away. But beneath the fear was iron determination. "Tell me what to do. I'll follow your lead." Aurora wanted to laugh or cry, or possibly both. Here she was, the accused murderess, about to give birth on the throne room floor while the newly crowned king knelt between her legs. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of story her father would have loved. "Get my gown out of the way," she managed. "And when I tell you to push, I mean when I push, you need to catch her." "I can do that." His voice was steady now, his hands gentle as he arranged her gown to preserve what modesty he could. "I've got you. I've got both of you." The next minutes blurred into a haze of pain and effort, and Darius's voice, constant and calm, guiding her through each contraction. She was vaguely aware of the crowd being pushed back, of someone bringing blankets and hot water, of the king on his knees with blood on his ceremonial robes, and absolutely no concern for anything except the woman before him. And then, with one final desperate push, Aurora felt her daughter slide free. A thin wail split the air, the most beautiful sound Aurora had ever heard. "She's perfect," Darius breathed, cradling the tiny, squalling infant in his massive hands with impossible gentleness. "Aurora, she's perfect." Tears streamed down Aurora's face as he placed their daughter, because she knew in that moment that he would never see this child as anything but his own, against her chest. The baby's cries softened as she found Aurora's heartbeat, her tiny fingers curling against Aurora's skin. "Welcome to the world, little one," Aurora whispered. The throne room erupted in cheers. They called her Elena. It was the name of Darius's mother, and when Aurora suggested it, the look on his face had been worth every moment of pain. Now, hours later, Aurora lay in the royal bedchamber with Elena sleeping in a cradle beside her. The chaos of the day had finally settled. Zara had been escorted to the border under heavy guard. The healer had been found and questioned and pardoned after tearfully confessing how Zara had threatened her family. And the kingdom had celebrated both a coronation and a royal birth in the same extraordinary day. The door opened quietly, and Darius slipped inside. He had changed out of his blood-stained ceremonial robes into simple dark clothing, and his crown sat on a table across the room, temporarily forgotten. When his eyes found Aurora, something in his expression cracked open. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said hoarsely. "Both of you. Standing there watching you in pain, knowing someone had done this deliberately." He broke off, his hands fisting at his sides. "Come here." He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, his forehead dropping to rest against her hip. Aurora threaded her fingers through his dark hair, feeling the tremors that ran through his powerful frame. "You didn't lose us," she murmured. "You saved us. You delivered our daughter in front of your entire kingdom." "Our daughter." He raised his head, and she saw the wonder in his eyes, the same wonder that had been there when he held Elena for the first time. "You know I'll never see her as anything less. She's mine, Aurora. You both are." "I know." And she did. She felt it through the bond that had been growing stronger every hour, felt it in the way his presence wrapped around her like a shield. "Darius, I need to tell you something." He went very still. "Whatever it is, I trust you." The words came out fierce, certain. "I tried not to. I told myself I couldn't afford to. But you've proven yourself 100 times over, and I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel." His breath caught. "I want this," Aurora continued, her hand finding his jaw, her thumb tracing the scars that crossed his cheekbone. "I want you. I want Elena to grow up knowing her father, because that's what you are, whether her blood matches yours or not." I want to be your queen, your partner, your mate. Aurora, his voice was raw. You know what you're asking for. The bond between mates. Once it's sealed. I know exactly what I'm asking for. She tilted her neck, baring the vulnerable line of her throat. Claim me. For a long moment, he didn't move. She could see the war in his eyes, the alpha demanding he take what was being offered, the man terrified of pushing too fast, of hurting her when she'd already been hurt so much. I need to hear you say it, he rasped, clear words, no room for doubt. I, Aurora Blackwood, choose you, Darius Frostborn, as my mate. She held his gaze steadily. I offer you my bond freely, completely, for the rest of our lives. Is that clear enough? His control snapped. He surged up from his knees, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that burned away every shadow of doubt, every lingering fear. Aurora kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, kneading him with an intensity that bordered on pain. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. This might hurt, he warned, his lips brushing the curve of her shoulder. At first, before the bond settles. I know. Do it anyway. His mouth opened against the junction of her neck and shoulder, his breath hot against her skin. Aurora felt his teeth graze her flesh, a warning, a promise. And then, pain exploded through her. She gasped, her body arching against his as his teeth sank deep into her flesh. For one terrible instant there was nothing but agony, sharp and bright and consuming. But even as she cried out, something shifted. The pain began to transform, bleeding into something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her veins, liquid gold spreading from the bite and racing through every nerve. She could feel him, not just his body against hers, but his very essence. His fierce protectiveness, his overwhelming love, his desperate fear that he didn't deserve this gift, followed by his absolute determination to earn it every day for the rest of their lives. Mine, he growled against her skin, and the word reverberated through the bond they now shared, settling into her bones like a brand. Aurora's hands found his shoulders, gripping hard enough to bruise. Not yet, she managed. He pulled back, confusion flickering through the haze of possessive satisfaction in his eyes. What? My turn. Understanding dawned. His eyes went wide, then molten gold, then something beyond either. He tilted his head, baring his own throat with the absolute trust of a wolf offering his most vulnerable place to his mate. Aurora leaned up, her lips finding the curve of his neck and shoulder. She could feel his pulse racing beneath her mouth, could taste the salt of his skin, could sense his anticipation thrumming through the bond like a second heartbeat. She bit down. He roared, a sound of shock and pleasure and primal satisfaction that shook the walls. Aurora felt his hands grip her hips, felt his whole body shudder as she sank her teeth deeper, claiming him as thoroughly as he had claimed her. And then, the bond completed. It was like a door being thrown open inside her chest, like stepping from darkness into light, like finding a missing piece of her soul she hadn't known was gone. She could feel everything he felt, his wonder, his joy, his absolute certainty that this was exactly where they were meant to be. Yours, his voice echoed through her mind. Always and forever. Mine, she answered, and felt his fierce satisfaction at the word. She released her bite, pressing her forehead to his shoulder as they both trembled with the force of what had just passed between them. His arms wrapped around her, careful of Elena sleeping nearby, pulling her against his chest where his heart beat in perfect rhythm with her own. Mate, he breathed against her hair. Mate, she answered and smiled against his skin. 2 weeks later, Aurora stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching snow fall over the kingdom below. Elena slept in her arms, bundled in soft wool against the winter chill, her tiny features peaceful in a way that made Aurora's heart ache with fierce love. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Darius's warmth. The messenger arrived from Silver Creek, he said quietly. My investigators found what they needed. Marcus has been arrested. Aurora's breath caught. They have proof? The servant who brought your father's tea confessed. Marcus threatened her family if she didn't add the wolfsbane. His arms tightened around her. Your father's murder has been solved. Your name has been cleared. The whole kingdom knows the truth. Tears slid down Aurora's cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief. My father will be properly honored. I've ordered a memorial in Silver Creek and another here in Shadow Peak. Darius pressed a kiss to her temple. Your daughter will grow up knowing exactly who her grandfather was. Through the bond, Aurora felt his love, steady and warm and utterly certain. She felt his determination to protect them, his joy in their small family, his hope for the future they would build together. She also felt Elena's dreams, fluttering softly through the bond they all now shared, vague impressions of warmth and safety and the heartbeats of the people who loved her most. The council has been asking about the coronation of the Luna Queen, Darius murmured against her hair. They want to set a date. Aurora laughed softly. I just gave birth on the throne room floor 2 weeks ago. Can't they give me a moment to recover? I told them they could wait. His voice dropped to a growl that made her shiver pleasantly. I told them my queen would be crowned when she was ready, and not a moment before. Your queen. The words still felt strange on her tongue, wonderful, but strange. 2 months ago, she had been a fugitive. A month ago, she had knelt in chains on this very floor, expecting death. Now she stood here as the Alpha King's mate, the mother of his heir, the future Luna Queen of Shadow Peak. The truth has a way of coming out, Zara had said. She had been right, just not in the way she intended. I'm ready, Aurora said quietly. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I want Elena to see it. I want her to know from her very first memories that she belongs here, that we both do. Darius turned her in his arms, cradling Elena carefully between them as he cupped Aurora's face with one hand. You do belong here, both of you. You're my family, my pack, my whole world. Aurora rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet, while Elena slept peacefully in her arms. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the kingdom in white. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound of celebration, of greeting, of welcome. Other voices joined it, the pack acknowledging their alpha and his mate, their voices rising toward the winter sky. Aurora tipped her head back and answered with a howl of her own. She had found her home.